Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to our third episode of the Thesis series. My name is Paige, and I'll be moderating this afternoon's discussion. Just a quick little blurb. Twitch Reach is a platform of like-minded individuals who really come together to create a platform for teachers, for parents, for learners, for anybody interested in education, really. And the platform is there to share information, share experiences, and increase our knowledge pool. Tonight, it's our third episode, like I said, and we are extremely privileged to have Sebastian Sanjigadu. So, Sebastian, I hope I got the surname right.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Sebastian Sanjigadu, who's an educator. He's a university tutor, an undergrad mentor, and a second-year PhD student at the UKZN. He specializes in science education with a scholarly focus on the decolonization of science education. He's been teaching at a public school for about 4 years, and those experiences, I believe, have really influenced his work. He's a creative, robust person. He values principles, and he is first and foremost an educator. That's Sebastian's own words, and he loves the education profession. Sebastian's thesis topic is a critical exploration of grade 11 life sciences teachers and learners' views about units of work with colonized and decolonized elements based on TB, that's tuberculosis. And he's going to also look at ideological insights from a school in Durban. Sebastian, welcome. We're really, really super excited to hear from you. Just a quick disclaimer. I've just had load shedding, and so I'm literally running off my hotspot. So I do hope that the connection is going to be strong enough and just be able to last for the entire session. Today's session will last approximately an hour 20 minutes. And if there are any questions, by the way, please be sure to pop them in the comments section, and I'll definitely get to those. Sebastian, without any further delay, can I ask you to share your screen? And then it's over to you. I see there's already a number of people with us. So please, if you are a friend or family member of Sebastian, please, send a message of encouragement. I'm pretty sure it's always helpful when people are presenting, just to know that there's somebody giving a bit of encouragement.
Is there anything coming up, Paige? Okay.
It came up like a second ago, but then I see it now. Let me just add to the stream. There we go. Excellent, excellent. I see that. What I'm going to do is also add us. There we go. Excellent. Thanks, Sebastian. Over to you.
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to thank Paige for the opportunity for allowing me to present. Also, the Teach to Reach organization and the Thesis series for these opportunities. So, like it had been said in the introduction, my thesis topic was a critical exploration of grade 11 life sciences, teachers and learners' views about units of work with colonized and decolonized elements based on tuberculosis, which is a topic in the curriculum, and in ideological insights from a school in Durban. It was a case study. And then I would like to start off with a disclaimer that my study is based on the use of indigenous knowledge to decolonize the curriculum, and I focused on the views of teachers and learners because I believe decolonization forced into a system may not really work. It would have been so I would have expected to understand the views of teachers and learners firstly before we engaged in the decolonization process. You would appreciate the picture at the bottom. It comes from North and Eastern Africa. It's the name of a bird. It's called Sonkafa. And it's a bird that is reaching back to retrieve a piece of itself that it had lost. As you can see, the black spot fits into the bird there. And in order, once it retrieves that black spot, it puts it back into itself and then is able to move forward. So that is a symbolism of what my study and what I believe decolonization should be about. Just a basic introduction. Although democracy has been achieved in South Africa in 1994, we know formally, racial inferiority and superiority pathologies are still at work in the country. Coloniality still survives colonialism. Science curriculum is one of the tools that is used to portray Western worldviews as universal. Apartheid, in terms of political apartheid, could have been removed or was removed some time back, but colonialism and neocolonialism continues to occur. Decolonization of science should be a robust exercise, and according to those who are trying to derail the decolonization agenda should not be trusted. Raju believes they are misleading many people and whose futures depend on the decolonization process. Colonization, now we need to understand it at first. It's to control the mind, not just a political agenda. It's functioning and existence of another being. Colonization could have been done through violence, brainwashing using politics, and education, and also using power and money. It is closely linked to the killing of a knowledge system and replacing it with another. The South African curriculum remains largely Eurocentric and continues to reinforce white and Euro-Western dominance and privilege. And we can see that the education system in South Africa is colonized. I like to refer to this as the first death, whereby it may seem extreme, but if I go into a classroom and my identity is not acknowledged, I am dead in that classroom. And I feel that our learners may feel a sense of this death in their education if we do not decolonize. I'd like to use the analogy of Plato's cave, where he speaks about being enslaved to the views that is enforced on us. As you can see, those men are being shown something through a lens. It can be a Euro-Western lens, it can be a colonial lens, whatever lens, but they are being shown something through a lens. But if those shackles are broken and they are allowed to turn and engage with their own environment and look around where they have been existing, I believe they would have a different view of things. We're looking at the power of perspective here. From one perspective, we see the man is saying that number is 6. And then the other perspective, the man is saying that number is 9. It is the same with a Eurocentric or Euro-Western perspective and an African perspective or an indigenous perspective. It's just the positionality. We can engage with similar or the same subject from different perspectives, and we should not be forced to look at a subject or an object from one perspective. So what is decolonization then? It is knowledge as a method for emancipating colonized people and reinstating indigenous knowledge. The view of decolonization as an emancipatory exercise, which may be used to value indigenous ideology, was central to my study. The assimilation of Western and indigenous knowledge so that our people draw on their local knowledge but are able to compete internationally. I would like to state that the decolonization process that I followed in my study was not based on removing Western or Euro-Western knowledge and replacing with indigenous knowledge. No. It was more the assimilation that we keep what is there, we explore what is there, but we also include indigenous knowledge. In this way, our students have a starting point, which are their own indigenous knowledges, and they can build on this by learning the subject, but also they understand the Western conceptualizations of this topic or subject, and they can compete internationally. So there should be no disadvantages to the decolonization process. There are different ways to decolonize, not just one. We can either Africanize, we address race and gender, we look at classist arguments where it's the Marxist thinking, it's emancipation of the mind only, it's indigenization, it's assimilation, and another way is the radical complete overhaul, which is the removal of Euro-Western thinking and replacing it with one of our own. When I speak about indigenous knowledge in my study, I spoke about the content, knowledge, and ideas. Since my topic was TB, I looked at the historical use of herbs and plants for medicinal use. That was one of the ways I decolonized. But the second way, and sometimes an overlooked way, is when we address the pedagogy. Indigenous knowledge is not about herbs and magic and tricks and ancestors only. It also speaks about pedagogy, where we have speaking circles instead of having a normal typical classroom, community engagement, collaboration. It is linked to rural settings where villages and close-knit communities are evident in the African context. There is respect shown, there is collaboration shown, there is group work shown. I also looked at who is defined as a knowledge holder. Who are holders of valuable knowledge? Do we only assume that those who went to school or university have knowledge? Do we assume that only those who are educated according to Western conceptions are knowledge holders? That is what I tried to challenge in my study. I also looked at the other aspect of ancestors and spiritual entities to African people. I failed to understand why were they omitted. Do they exist? Do they function? Indigenous knowledge is useful. We see that indigenous populations developed techniques which were seen to be environmentally friendly and cost-effective. The close links to the plant and animals, as well as the natural world, held value for the indigenous people. If I look at these 4 pictures, which are indigenous links, we see that each of these can have a science or a maths topic linked to them. The first one is a open fertilization that led to these different variations of mealie seeds. It is different from GMs or genetically modified mealies, and this practice has been done for years in the African continent. That can be used in a life science classroom for GMO or fertilization. We look at the second picture, which is a kraal, a homestead. These buildings have been there for years. We can see we can teach circle geometry. There's angles, there's displacement, there's distances that can be taught there, there's ratios that can also be taught there in mathematics. The third picture at the bottom is a clay oven. Here we can link it to certain physical science topics, looking at the carbon footprint. The clay conserves a lot of heat and is different from conventional ovens. So you would use less wood in the clay oven. And also the shape and the dimensions can be used to teach different equations, etc. The fourth and last picture there is the fermentation process of Mkomboti, the Zulu beer. Here we can also teach natural science and life science issues when we're talking about fermentation, we're talking about chemical reactions, acid-base reactions. These can be linked. These concepts of indigenous knowledge have been there for years, and African people have understood them. Why did I use indigenous knowledge? Because of its close links to the natural world, which is linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. Indigenous knowledge can contextualize and relate content to what learners know from their culture. Before a child goes to school, a child is taught and is trained at home in their own culture. I believe that culture should be the first starting point. As Vygotsky speaks about the zone of proximal development, where you teach a learner from what he knows and takes him to what he doesn't know. So indigenous knowledge and culture is something that students come to the classroom with. Why are we not drawing on those ideas and taking them further to learn the academic concepts? Inclusion of indigenous knowledge is one strategy towards decolonization, and this is the one that I chose in my study. Some of the scholars that are popular in terms of decolonization, and I used most of them: Fanon, Melanado Torres, Roman Grossvogel, John Dewey, Paul Freire, Giroux, and Karl Marx. Many people would be familiar with these. But should we be reading more, especially our African and South African scholars? Sabelo Ndlovugacheni, Mbembe, Wationgo, Aslam Fatar, Leslie Lagrange from the Cape Town, Patricia Nokolo, and Jonathan Jansen. But I would like to take you a bit further. Should we even be reading some of these and teaching our learners about them? Chinua Achebe, Credo, 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 Steve Biko, Odara Hoppers, C.K. Raju, Ellen Kuzwayo, should we be reading about these knowledge producers, and do we define them as holders of valuable knowledge? So in terms of my study, it was conducted in a South African school where teachers and learners are Zulu speakers. The participants in my study were grade 11 teachers and learners and an Indigenous knowledge holder. They were randomly selected. The Indigenous knowledge holder was selected because of their knowledge of TB, but also she was an academic with knowledge of the curriculum. I believe that any knowledge holder could have been selected here. Could be an old woman from the community, could be a Sangoma, could be a scholar, it could be a pastor, it could be anyone with Indigenous knowledge that is relevant to your topic or your study. We should not be defining a knowledge holder according to Euro-Western ideas, because knowledge has been passed down informally, orally, in stories, in games, in puppetry, from different people, not just those who were educated in Western or Euro-Western settings. The rationale, the reason why I conducted my study is because differentiated interventions for each of the groups of science learners must be developed and implemented. So because I'm teaching in a classroom full of Zulu students, I believe that Indigenous knowledge is an intervention that I could use to decolonize. Life science concepts need to be linked to learners' daily lives, and the presence of colonized ideologies deepen marginalization of life science learners. I used two theories to frame my study. First, the critical theory, which focuses on knowledge, power, and oppression. It also looks to emancipate, change, transform, and empower. I also focused on the community of practice theory. Here, where we're looking at the sharing of knowledge, where I did not work by myself. I worked with a knowledge holder and I worked with teachers as well to decolonize the curriculum. We worked in a group, in a community. As I drew on before, the collaborative work is evident in the African and Indigenous cultures. So I defined colonization, and we look at it becoming aware of this form of colonization, especially with the education system of a country, is crucial. We need to know that colonization is still present. Colonization is an extension of human cultural stratification and is based on a system that consists of a dominant Western and dominated non-Western populace. There is a power hierarchy there. So then decolonization should be ethically oriented, epistemically geared, politically motivated, and economically necessary process that has the elite figures in society as a central philosophical and political figure, and is consequently articulated by the colonized themselves. In my study, I used 5 phases in the decolonization process as framed by Chilisa: the rediscovery and recovery, the mourning, dreaming, commitment, and action. These all need to be actioned in a decolonization stance when you're looking at the decolonization process. So when we come to decolonization of the curriculum, we looked at exposing learners to the ever-present encryption of colonial powers. We need to make them aware of what is colonized in the curriculum, what is there that can be used. Science being taught and learned in different contexts, cultures, peoples, and experiences. It involves also fundamental rethinking and reframing of the curriculum and bringing South Africa and Africa to the center of teaching and learning. With a focus on life science, Mudali in her research using pre-service life science teachers in a South African university states that we need to tap into locally based and locally produced Indigenous knowledge, so the lines between Indigenous and colonial and between non-Western and Western knowledge become blur. The power relations need to be blurred, but the content needs to be explicit. So the gap in the literature that I found was that decolonial, colonial, and Indigenous studies, theories, and issues were not fully part of mainstream education. I also found that there is a scarcity of research on decolonizing content in the life science curricula in South Africa. The research design that I adopted was the critical paradigm, firstly, where I took a critical stance, a critical view at my phenomenon. The methodology used was qualitative, where I used descriptions, narrations, focus group interviews, individual interviews, where I observed and took notes of the occurrences in the classroom between the colonized and the decolonized curriculum. My design was the ideological critique. I critiqued the ideology of life science topic, the TB topic, whereby I allowed teachers to teach the topic in the conventional way with the Euro-Western ideologies. I observed and critiqued these. And secondly, I, in collaboration with teachers and an Indigenous knowledge holder, decolonized a second aspect of the same TB topic and allowed teachers to teach this in the new way using Indigenous knowledge. And this was also critiqued. So my research question, the first one was, what evidence of coloniality is present in a unit of work based on TB in the grade 11 life science curriculum? I was looking at what is colonized actually. To answer this question, I had to look at curriculum documents. I looked at life science textbooks, resources, and teacher support material. I observed initial lessons being taught. The initial lesson was not decolonized. It was a normal lesson being taught. So then once the lesson was taught, I asked the second research question was, what are teachers and learners' views about the ideology which underpins work based on TB, which contains colonial elements? So what are their feelings about this kind of learning? To answer these questions, I individually interviewed teachers. I interviewed learners in a focus group. And so my third question is, how can a unit of work based on TB in the grade 11 life science curriculum be decolonized by a community of practice using Indigenous knowledge? The community of practice, like I said before, was made up of myself, the researcher, life science teachers, and the Indigenous knowledge holder. We worked together to decolonize this curriculum because the academics in the group brought in the curriculum knowledge, the Indigenous knowledge holder brought in the Indigenous knowledge, and together we also researched as well. So I invited the Indigenous knowledge holder to work with myself and the other teachers. To do this, we also analyzed documents. We looked at the minutes of our meetings. We looked at the discussions, and we individually reflected in order to understand how exactly did we decolonize the unit. And then I observed the revised lesson to see how exactly was this unit of work decolonized. And then finally, I asked the question, what are teachers and learners' views about ideology which underpins work based on TB, which includes a decolonized element? The decolonized element was the Indigenous knowledge. So after this lesson was taught, I got their views again. And the decolonized lesson was taught by the life science teachers. Individual interviews of the teachers were done. Focus group interviews with learners were conducted to answer this question. And we come to my major findings. My first major finding was Euro-Western knowledge systems, contexts, and ideologies are privileged in units of work based on TB in grade 11 life sciences. It would not come as a surprise where the views of teachers and learners on work underpinned by colonial ideologies reflected a raised consciousness as well as a sense of disempowerment. They felt terrible, they felt weak. They felt as if their own knowledge systems and their own Indigenous knowledge was not present. They felt absent from the curriculum. Another key finding revealed that in order to fuse elements of decolonization into the revised unit of work, members of the community of practice had to be committed in terms of the pedagogy they advocated for and the content they researched. Decolonization is hard work. Members of the community of practice had to also engage in processes of dreaming and action. Dreaming is to reimagine, what can the curriculum look like? What can I decolonize? What is different? And the last part is the action. It has to be an active process of decolonizing. We can't just make mention of Indigenous knowledge. We have to be practical about it. The final finding showed that the views of grade 11 teachers and learners on the revised lesson on TB showed that they did value, in fact, inclusivity of alternative knowledge systems. They value their own identity as an African teacher or an African learner. Participants also viewed ideology underpinning the revised lesson to reflect empowerment because it transcended familiar pedagogical boundaries and reduced the knowledge power hierarchy. And that was the findings of my study. So before I move on to the next section, where I give the implications of the study, I would like to maybe leave it open for any questions or comments. My email address is at the bottom there. Thanks, Paige.
Thanks, Sebastian. I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure if you're going to perhaps touch on this in the second bit. I'll ask one of them now, and then we can see if you're going to answer now or wait till a bit later. The question is about community of practice.
Yes.
It's such an interesting topic. This idea of, firstly, the word. If you just take those three words, community of practice, those two, community and practice, there's so much of rich information just in those two words. And I was wondering if you could perhaps go into a bit more detail with this concept, community of practice. I'm certain that many of us who are listening and who will listen in the future via the recorded show, it'll be the first time that this concept has ever been heard. So can you give us some more examples just to help us to understand this concept a bit further?
Okay, so thanks, Paige, for the question. We're looking at community of practice. It was first coined by Wagner, 1999. If you Google that article, you'll find community of practice theory. We're looking at a practice, which is for our own understanding, we're looking at the teaching practice. So it's a practice that we engage in. And then we're looking at community. So the community is a combination of practitioners. So a community of teachers. But it goes a bit further than that, because who are we defining as a teacher? Are we calling only university holding or degree holding educators as teachers? Or a teacher can be the lady on the corner who has some indigenous knowledge that she can share with a group of young children. So the community of practice is made up of three pillars. Is the community itself, which is the individuals we're calling teachers. In my study, I called the indigenous knowledge also a practitioner. I called that person a teacher as well. Myself, the researcher, who I see as a teacher, and a few other teachers. That is the community. That's the first pillar. The second pillar now is the context. So the context, we're talking about where are we going to practice? Where are we going to engage? In this study, the context at least was the life science curriculum. The context was the decolonization of the life science curriculum. So the second pillar of the community of practice theory is the context. In which setting, in which environment are you engaging in? And then the last pillar, obviously, is our practice itself. What are we doing? As the community in that context, are we observing? Are we engaging? Are we actioning? Are we dreaming? So those three concepts, those three pillars, build on the community of practice theory. It's looking at the collaboration, especially in the COVID-19 context in South Africa, the educational context in South Africa, where much of our work is being done online, much of our work is being done with social distancing, much of our work is being done in isolation. So why not, in this context, in the distance, we still bring together our combined knowledge, our combined understanding, and teach. Conventionally, in a school setting, this can be called team teaching or group teaching. It's a similar concept, but we need to be intentional about what we're doing by identifying the three different pillars. I'm not sure if you are answered.
That's a brilliant answer, and I like what you did at the end there. You brought in the pedagogical approach as well. Team teaching is something that many teachers listening to this will easily recognize, and so thank you for that. It's a collaborative approach to teaching, tapping into resources that perhaps we've been brought up to believe are not important. But there's importance in that community. There's importance in the lady that's sitting in the corner with indigenous knowledge. And so thank you for that. It's very, very important. That's brilliant. Thanks, Sebastian.
Perfect. I can move on if there's no other questions.
Yeah, I think you can.
Okay. So what are the implications? It comes down to the race issue. Colonization came down to the race issue. It was Black against non-Black. It was a dominated race that was oppressed, that was called to be controlled, and a superior race that were doing the controlling. So it's a complex issue, the issue of race.
Can I
Because
ask
the
you a
color of
question?
skin is yes.
Sorry to cut you off there. I'm assuming you're probably going to get to this in a second, but I'm assuming when you talk about the issue of race and a perceived superior race, a perceived inferior race, you're talking about it in terms of what is known or what is thought of in the community. This isn't necessarily the scientific truth, because my immediate question will be, what concept do you have of race? And I'm pretty sure you're coming into the slide actually touches on that.
Definitely.
Okay, so brilliant. So I suppose just a clarification from my side is that the concept of race that you're talking about, and the terms that you're using, you don't agree with the concept of superior. You don't agree with those terms, that terminology.
Not at all. Not at all.
Great. Sorry for that interruption.
No, it's fine. Yeah, actually, so we're looking at the color of the skin. Now, when I'm talking about color of skin, I'm talking about, it's called melanin of that you find that gives your skin a certain color. It does not impact your brain capacity. It does not impact your socialization. It does not impact how high you stay up, because at the end of the day, you are a Homo sapien. That's the species that you are. The coloration can be just seen as a variation. And we see that the color of the skin has become criteria for control and domination, which is something that is difficult to understand to a decolonized or decolonial scholar who understands knowledge to be constructed in any context, not just in a Euro-Western context, not just in a African context. And we see that religion, sports, fashion, beauty, education, business, COVID-19, 5G, all these things are impacted by the falsehood that one race is better than the other. And it is a social construct. The truth is very different. And at times, even Black empowerment is driven by racial agendas. I will get to that in a moment. And obviously, contemporary issues speak about Black Lives Matter. The movement comprises many views and a broad array of demands. When I'm talking about Black Lives Matters, I fully support that Black lives should matter, because for many people out there, and I pity many people out there who don't understand this concept, the value of Black lives, the value of all lives. But it is important to highlight that Black lives matter, because many people have lost the conception that Black lives matter. And we see that the unfortunate aspect of the Black Lives Matter movement is that it is centered on criminal justice reform in the United States, which is not really what Black Lives Matter should be about. Black Lives Matter should be about the decolonization, the renewing of the mind, the understanding that different knowledge systems, different races have value in their knowledge. A poll conducted in September 2020 showed that support among American adults had dropped to 55% for the Black Lives Matter movement, while support remained widespread among Black adults. So in the general population in America, the support for Black Lives Matter dropped, while it remained widespread among Black adults. The point that I'm getting to is that, is this Black Lives Matter really working? Or do we need a different kind of approach to make sure that people understand the value of all races and all cultures? The Black Lives Matter, we need to understand, who is it being funded by? Is it being funded by Black people themselves? Location. Why is the Black Lives Matter movement taking place or largely located in Euro-Western context? Why is that? Is it disconnected from the people it claims to represent? Do Black American lives matter more, or do Black lives in general matter? It has also been criticized for insufficient focus on women and allegations of financial impropriety. So when we look at the notion of decolonization and the notion of empowerment, and Black empowerment especially, we need to understand, are there no other contentions at play? We're looking at George Floyd, at least. There we can see the picture. It's a bit gruesome for me now, but then he's being knelt on. We know this incident, and we see the Black Lives Matter movement is based on taking the knee. I find it a bit difficult. This is my personal contention, but I find it a bit difficult to understand why are we taking the knee, because clearly the knee was taken by that policeman, and George Floyd was on the ground being choked to death. So when we're taking the knee, whoever came up with the conception of taking the knee, I'm not sure what message it's sending out, but I would rather be in solidarity with George Floyd. And then where was this movement during the Marikana killings and other offenses against Black people? Here I'm looking at Maldonado Torres's contention of decolonization of the mind, not just decolonization at face value. I'm looking at contemporary issues here, the recent Wits protests that have been done by students. We can see that they've been injured. It's been painful. It's gruesome. But where is the Black Lives Matter movement there? I haven't seen much of it. During the COVID-19, although there were some 350 Rand relief funds, we're still standing in lines. We're still not socially distanced. We still can be infected there. And we see that 350 Rand is not, it at times can be seen to be used to keep the Black man or to keep the disempowered at a state where they have to rely on that amount of money and there is no progress, there is no move from there. Not that I have anything against the relief, but I believe that there should be some contingency plan in that it can improve my life as a person, that I would not be seen as someone who is disempowered, economically disadvantaged. There should be a better contingency plan. It should be focused on education. It should be focused on socializations. It should be focused on getting our people away from these kind of environments that we see in the last slide. I'm looking at the conception of value, the conception of what is beautiful, the conception of decolonization. You can assume to be decolonized, but look at the brands and the clothing we value. If someone asked me, if you were rich, what kind of clothing will you be wearing? And we see there's a picture there of a brand. Why are we not supporting local African indigenous brands? Why are we not proud of our own products? When we are asked which place you would like to visit, I'm sure you can see that Eiffel Tower. It's in a Euro setting. If you're talking about decolonizing and strengthening your understanding of Black Lives Mattering, then why are we valuing these locations? Why do we value this food over our indigenous food, over our indigenous culture? Why do we value this appearance over our own African appearances? And I come to the end. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Sebastian. That was absolutely amazing. So I've got a couple of questions, but before I get to my questions, how did your master's study end? Like, what was one of the, or a few of the results or outcomes, that came out of your study, your actual findings of your study, in terms of the life sciences curriculum and that decolonialization process? What did you find out in terms of that? You mentioned a couple of them, but I was wondering if you just go into a little bit more detail regarding that life sciences curriculum. You did say, I remember you saying that it has been the Eurocentric view, or that worldview has been sort of privileged in a sense. Can you go into a bit more detail? One of the another 2 or 3 findings that might have been.
Yeah, definitely. We're looking there at when we're talking about the scientists that are shown in the textbook, we see they are mostly from Euro-Western descent in our textbook. Okay, it's very hard to find a textbook that has someone of African or indigenous descent. That's the first point. The second point, we're looking at the treatment. The only treatment that is prevalent in those textbooks we can understand is antibiotics. It is set in a medical, so when you have maybe a cartoon in the textbook, it's in a clinic setting, it's in a hospital setting with tools and instruments that are have originated in Western contexts. But we know that for years, and this has been anecdotal evidence from my study, where the indigenous knowledge holder had told me that they have been treating TB for many years. It was called isfuba. Isfuba means chest or a chest sickness. They used to use it, and they used to treat it using impepo, which is a herb. And we're looking at the herbs. We're looking at also consultation with ancestors. That's what they used to do in order to treat TB. So we find that, and she says for years they've been treating it and antibiotics were not used because she's from a remote area where access to a clinic is very difficult. But you find that students and learners that who go to school and only taught Euro-Western antibiotics and medical treatment even refuse to take this kind of treatment, and they can end up dying because they are not aware that there's alternative treatment there. And the alternative treatments are not being valued. So that is another finding that I found. The third one is that your starting point or your explanation can start from an indigenous or a Western perspective, but it would not necessarily impact your content knowledge because you are still following the CAPS curriculum. You are still achieving your outcomes. As much as you are describing to your students the indigenous ways and understandings and knowings, you always come back to your curriculum content, you emphasize your curriculum content, and you should be fine. We're not replacing anything from the textbook or the curriculum. That's what decolonization in my understanding means.
Mm. So, okay, that's brilliant. That helps. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so you ended off your presentation speaking about race, and I think it's so relevant and so apt for us today, especially in South Africa, you know.
Yeah.
And I've got a comment here on one of the somebody from on Facebook, Sebastian Sanjigadu, who mentioned the ending of his comment was basically that hey, you're an Indian guy, you know what I mean? So concerning this topic of race, which you've now mentioned is a social construct, and I'm going to incorrectly use the terminology which was created during this whole process. Why would an Indian person want to touch on the concept of decoloniality? What's up with that?
Okay, firstly, being an Indian and my race and the color of skin should not impact my conceptualization, my understanding, and my truth. Because Sebastian Sanjigadu is saying I'm an Indian guy, but I've been socialized, I've been socialized in a way where I see right and wrong. I see what should be done and what should not be done. So I position myself in a way in that I don't have to look at the race. If there was white people or Eurocentric people or Eurocentric knowledge being oppressed, then I would have positioned myself in that perspective. I be objective. I'm objective in my research. I'm objective in my scholarly understanding, in my impulses. So when this study was done after I became a teacher, so while engaging in my curriculum, I did not do the study in my first year of teaching. I observed. I looked at how my students felt because I was in Zululand. I was teaching Zulu-speaking students. And I found that this is the kind of research and this is the kind of development that I need to approach. So research should be according to your contextualization, according to your environment, because I believe there's no point in me researching something that is not relevant to my life, not relevant to my learners. I want to impact my learners. I take this knowledge to different topics that I teach in the classroom. I don't just stop it at my research. So being an Indian guy, teaching in a Zulu school, teaching Zulu learners who I feel have the disadvantage at times when it comes to the curriculum, I position myself by placing my learners first. So my race plays no role in the kind of research or teaching that I do.
That's brilliant. So straight away, that's a mark of a true dedicated educator, where you can remove all bias, because that's what we're talking about here. It's a perceived bias. Sviso, thank you very much for that comment, my bro. Really, it sounds like you know Sebastian. Is Sviso perhaps a student or a colleague?
Yeah, he's my colleague. I know him.
Brilliant. No, Spiso, we want to get you on here as well. Eh? So, no, that's fantastic. Thank you, Spiso. Sebastian, I suppose the follow-up question would sort of a projection for us as a country, for you, I suppose. You know, where to? What do you think is our future in terms of race? This concept of race is embedded in everything, like you've said in your presentation, in everything that we do. It's embedded in education, in business. It's embedded in everything, and people across the country will interact with you according to your race, your perceived race. You know, so how do we change this concept? Do we change this concept? Is it something that we're just going to have to live with? You know, I was with somebody from my place of work who was talking about their origins, and they've got a white dad and a colored mom, you know, and this person was grappling with identity. What am I seen as? Am I seen as a white person, as a colored person? And so it's deeply embedded in everything that we do, think, and say in this country. What do you think? Is there a way forward regarding race, regarding this concept of race for us?
Yeah, I would like to categorically note that it's my personal view. However, from my PhD study, which is focused on sustainable development, positionality is not important if it does not lead to an end goal. So whether you're white or you're colored or you're Indian is of no consequence if your impact on the world and your impact in academia and your impact in scholarship is negated. So when I come to the issue of race, I do acknowledge that I'm an Indian person, like I said in my response to Sfiso's question. I know my identity, but that should not affect my practice and how I socialize and engage with other people. It is more on the integration. That is why I spoke a bit of Zulu, to try and show you that it's not only Zulu people that can speak Zulu. So we should see ourselves as a vessel. Whether I'm a blue cup, a red cup, or an orange cup, the water in me should be the same color. So as a teacher, I have to respond as a teacher because I find that that's my greatest calling. As a teacher, the way in which I engage with my learners would not be different if I was a different color. So white people in the country themselves, and there are many of them that I know, lecturers that I work with, who work so well with any race, they integrate very well. If they speak, you would not know if they are a white person or not, because the race is in the background, it falls away. So it's more of let's pulling away the race and putting on the mask of that role that you've taken. So the mask in COVID-19 is very important. It's nice because we're all wearing masks, so we can see who looks like what. So if I had to wear a mask and speak Zulu to you, won't be sure whether I'm colored or Zulu with the funny hairstyle or whatever. But I find that we need to put on a mask of wanting to improve South Africa. So we should put on the mask of a South African, of an African, and function, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a business person, complete your function in a certain way that race falls away right to the back and race becomes an afterthought. Race should not be something that you are judged on or judged upon, because race, at the end of the day, I spoke about, because I'm a life science teacher, the melanin, the color, is just a color that you find. We don't judge different kinds of insects based on the color. We don't say we're going to kill that blue fly and leave the black one out. We never do that. So why should we do it with people? I don't see the point, because we are an evolved species from the animal kingdom. But at times we fail to understand from the animal kingdom that you are not judged on your variation, genetic variation. You are not judged. You are judged on your function and your purpose in today's world. And I believe that is based on sustainable development, removal of poverty and inequalities in society.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you for that. I'll take a second just to ask if anybody's watching. If you guys have a question, please pop it into the comments box. And while we wait for one or two comments or questions, Sebastian, you are busy with your PhD at the moment, and you've just mentioned that it's about, just remind me, what's the actual topic of the theme about?
Oh, the theme is basically using indigenous knowledge to address the sustainable development goals in the science and maths curriculum. So I took my master's study a bit further. Since we're decolonizing the curriculum, I wanted this study now to see decolonize for what goal, for what outcome. Okay, it's empowerment of the indigenous knowledge, empowerment of indigenous people, but what is the benefit? I saw that indigenous knowledge, because of our natural way of doing things, of the connection with the environment, that is very sustainable. So South Africa is undergoing the sustainable development initiatives by the National Development Plan that we have in progress. That's why we have certain of the policies that President Cyril Ramaphosa spoke about in his State of the Nation address. But I believe that the use of indigenous knowledge within the curriculum and teaching our learners about indigenous knowledge and teaching them about sustainable development, hand in hand, we find that we can move forward as a country to remove the gender inequality issues, poverty issues, because it has to start at school. We have to teach them at school. It's too late to get a man out there abusing a woman. It is very late already. He has become an abuser already. So we need to start in our schools. We need to speak about these issues. We need to portray equality in the classroom, because the classroom is a microcosm of society.
Wow, brilliant. Excellent. Yeah, I really have no more questions. I think you ended that off brilliantly. I don't see any questions in our comments, and so I'm going to call it an afternoon there. I just want to encourage people who might see this in the future, post it on YouTube or Facebook. If you have any questions, Sebastian has put his email address up in the, more or less in the middle of the presentation. And so if you have any questions about decoloniality, about race, about his own study, please feel free to pop him an email. I'm sure he will gladly help and assist in whatever questions you have. Sebastian, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. It's been a very engaging, a very fruitful, informative hour. And we're looking forward to having you back when your PhD is done. When are you expecting to finish, or when would you like to finish?
No, sometimes it's not like you have to. I have to be done by next year.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Okay. Well, yeah. All the best to you, and we definitely will.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're most welcome. All right. Excellent. I'm going to end this broadcast. Sebastian, you stay on for a few minutes. Thanks to everybody who joined us. Have a great afternoon.